You know, there's a great quote that's in the front of your bulletin today from Goethe, the poet, who said, "I call architecture frozen music." What he meant was the beauty of music turns solid. So there's an important message in all of today's thing for us that Jesus gives us in today's gospel, and it's all about our house, this house, your house. As he said, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain came down, the winds rose, and the streams rose, the winds blew, and it beat against that house, and yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine, who does not put them into practice, is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." Yeah, this Sunday after Easter, with the noise of an Alleluia is still ringing in our ears from last week with beautiful music that Jim and the choir did, I think it's time to sit back in the quiet and think about the wonderful gift that our early church leaders gave us when their fourth meeting house was reduced to a pile of ashes in 1907. This was a real kind of Easter. This was a real kind of Easter moment. The very thing that they loved, that they thought was the church, was utterly destroyed. Now what? Where was their Easter resurrection? The one thing I admire when I was going back through all the things I look at to put together a program like this is that in our church histories, in the telling of the story about the fire, nowhere is any person or group publicly blamed for the fire or for the conflagration. You know, that's grace in action. Move away from blame to action. You know, Jesus started out the gospel, if you remember today, saying, "Do not judge, lest you will be judged. For in the same measure you use, it'll be measured to you." So instead of blaming, what did these first 20th century leaders set about doing? There were two things that are vitally important. First of all, learning lessons from what happened, and second, having a vision for what the future will bring, and building on it. So what lesson did they learn from the fire? One of the things they learned quickly is that even beautiful wood frame New England buildings, white New England buildings, no matter how classically New England, do burn. All that wood. So perhaps the next building should take into account a design that preserves at least part of the building in such disasters with brick. Our congregation leaders of the church learned another important lesson that week in 1907. A church is not just the building. Within 2 weeks of the fire, they had raised $25,000 in 1907 dollars. That was even already in 2 weeks, a quarter of what they needed to rebuild this church. And our church, as you can see, would not let itself die. But what they would build would have to incorporate in its bones our theology, the beliefs of our Puritan congregational tradition. The design had to silently believe in simplicity, in balance, and focus on the feelings of the Spirit of God. I know that every time I bring someone into this church who's never been in it before, and the minute they walk through the doors with me, they go, "Wow." The minute you open the doors here, you feel this expansive, you feel the light filling you. You feel something special in this place. You know, and so after all, our former meeting house on Main Street was that quintessential white church that you see on any New England green. And you know, Cotton Mather was the great Puritan preacher of the day, way back, said, "What can be a better or nobler work and more worthy of a Christian than to erect and support a reformed particular church in its infancy, and unite our forces with such a company of faithful people as by a timely assistance may grow stronger and prosper." When our congregation first gathered for worship in 1696, it was within one of the homes of 8 of the families down where Worcester and Main Street meet. But soon they built a real church. It was what they call a 4-square church, post and beam, very plain. All there was on the inside were benches where you would sit every Sunday, every service, for about 3 or 4 hours, by the way. So feel fortunate today that you are spared that. There's no steeple, no fancy windows, no elaborate ritual-filled theology, only that all of us are required to read the Bible, and that's why pulpits are center in churches. Puritan values sought to find God in all things and rejected overt religious symbolism of the type found at that time in Catholic churches. So there are no statues, there are no stations of the cross. There's just you, the Word, and God. So, in fact, at that time, in the early Congregationalists, the whole celebration of Christmas was outlawed. Puritans couldn't celebrate Christmas. That was too papist. And they also had no instruments. There was no piano. There was no music at the very, very beginning, until they suddenly realized that they had gone overboard in destroying organs and religious symbols and not welcoming music. So very soon, music was found to lift and link the soul to God. When clergy and laymen realized this, church architecture began to change to enhance the song and music for the congregation. Our first and second meeting houses down at the foot of Main Street were plain 4-square buildings. But the third, which was where the Civil War monument is today, was the first that echoed the changes in what American churches were going to look like. When it came to Protestant churches, by this time music was the centerpiece of worship. And about this time, a new style of building called the Georgian style was gaining traction in Europe. This is a Georgian revival building. Now, Georgian, the word Georgian has nothing to do with Atlanta. Okay? It doesn't even have anything to do with the country over by Turkey. What it has to do is named after 4 British kings named George in succession when this type of style was coming out in English. It's an English style. So Americans, oddly enough, here they just fought the British, but they were still Anglophiles at heart. And very soon they adopted this beautiful new style. So we have to remember, this was not unusual. The Anglophiles in this town, at first we were Swampfield until 1687, when they decided to change our name to Danbury, remembering how much they enjoyed that beautiful town in Essex, England. So what makes Georgian architecture unique? During the reigns of the 4 Georges, architects in England kind of rebelled against Gothic, as again being much more associated with Catholicism than their Protestant beliefs. And it was the peak of the Reformation. We were turning things around and trying to get back to a simpler, cleaner way of living. So they became influenced by an architect, an Italian architect named Andrea Palladio. Now, some of you must have heard of Palladian windows before. They came back into vogue a little bit in the 1980s. These are all Palladian windows with an arch on the top and this long expanse. So these are all Palladian windows. So he was a very influential architect, and he turned his interest in to classics. Rome, and Greece. And so all those elements, the things that lived in Greece and in Rome and the beautiful architecture, were brought into this Georgian style. The interesting thing to remember is Rome and Greece took their symbols and took their ideas from Egypt's concept, a concept of life and death and life after death. So you've been sitting for a long time in a whirlpool of symbols for Greece, Rome, and Egypt. In terms of the Georgian revival, in church buildings like ours, they embedded symbols on almost every surface. And you've probably been looking at these for a while and thinking, well, it's just nice carving. But it's more than that. It's a recurrent theme of life, death, and immortality, and I'm going to show those things to you today. The entire building is set up for maximum light. Georgian churches wanted to have wonderful acoustics for music, so they wanted the area open, and they wanted every seat in the place to be a good seat to sit. So that's why it's designed this way. And the high center pulpit I've mentioned. So when you enter the church, you do get swept up into this lightness of the atmosphere. In a Georgian church, nothing is off balance. Everything is paired together. There's symmetry. And it speaks to living according to the rules in a reformed way. That we listen to what God says. We listen to what morality is. And our buildings reflect a quiet reaffirmation of our beliefs in that way. So now I'm going to come down, if I can get my mic on here, and I'm going to actually show you some of these things. There's only one way to do this, and that's why I asked you to move forward today. By the way, as I'm coming down here, does anybody know what this is? This newel post here, does anyone know what it is? That's a pineapple. It's a symbol, as many people know in colonial times, of hospitality. When you walk outside today and you look at the exterior of this church, it's going to be filled with urns with pineapples on top of them. And we're about to talk about those urns as well. So, I want to talk about the organ front, because that's the thing we can see most easily here. And this whole area, when Stokes and Howell designed it with the Palladian architecture, but also allowed for the music to be enhanced. So what we have here, these screens, everybody see the screen here? Shaped like a Palladian window. And it's pierced through so that all the music can come through these 4 screens. Once again, there are 4 of them. Symmetrical, 2 on one side, 2 on the other, balance. Another thing you see from the classics of Rome and Greece are these pediments. And here you see this one. This is the typical way you see a pediment. These on the side are broken pediments as a design. But what they've done is they've put a scroll on the end of the broken pediment to make it look like an open book. Learning, knowledge, wisdom, classicism. Then on top of that, we have, very interestingly, along here, these swags. You see them here. These swags, they go right across the front. Each of the swags looks like a piece of cloth pinned to a rosette. One of the things you're going to find, that this whole place is not about death. It's about immortality. It's about life and rebirth. So these rosettes are little roses that hold the swags. You're going to find them everywhere. They're up here with these drops. And so these swags come across here. And swags have a significance as well. If you look way, way up here, you see 2 urns. And they have a cloth draped over them. The reason they have it draped is the same reason we're draping the cross. It's an honor to someone who has gone on from this state of death and is now living in immortality. So you'll find these urns with these swags. And why urns? Have you ever taken a moment and tried to count how many urns there are in here? Take a look. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's some back there I can't see. 9, 10, 11. It's full of urns. What do you think urns stand for? It goes back to Egypt. It was in Egypt that the Egyptians believed when you died, they would take your internal organs and they put it in an urn. And those were kept and preserved so that you could rise again from this part of you. So urns are, today we associate them with ashes and cremains, but urns are a sign that you were there, you've gone on, in this case, you've gone on into eternal life, and every one of these urns honors someone who was in this church, who has gone on to be with God. The other interesting thing here are these big roundels here on each side. Now, as I checked with Jim before I said this. Our bellows are behind these big roundels. And so, again, the architecture is supporting the music because that's so important in the church. And the symbolism of the roundels is, again, from Egypt. And in Egypt, the sun was worshipped, so it's a sun figure. Although the Greeks took it and the Romans took it and turned it into sunbursts and to rose windows and things like that. But for us, again, it's a living thing made up of flowers, etc., and it's enforcing living more than anything else. Way up above there, and there's another type of urn, okay, an open urn with feathers and flowers. Anything that is related to death has living things growing out of it, saying that this is not the end. So that you are surrounded by, essentially, a resurrection building. That's what this is. And then one of the things that you'll find everywhere in here are columns. And these columns, does anybody know what kind of columns these are? Anybody take architecture? No, that's one, but they're not Doric. There are three types of columns going back to high school now. Doric, which is the simple one. Ionic, which is shaped like a capital I with curlicues on each side. And Corinthian. So these are from the styles of the temple of Ionia in Greece. So all of these are Ionic columns, but even in the Ionic columns, there are flowers budding out of the inside of each of the Ionic columns. Just get over here. The other thing that you'll see all over the place in here are these little teeth. And fittingly, these are called dental molding. Not D-A-N-T-A-L, but D-I-N-T-I-L-E, for tooth-like molding. And what they are an element of design which architects for centuries now have loved the play of light and dark. It gives a kind of rhythm to the space. And you see more of that sign, also some of this rhythm up here, different type. Okay? Those, in their time, represented the end posts of the rafters that held the roof of the temple of Ionia up. But it was thought so highly of as a design element that they kept it and encouraged it and even embellished it along the way. So the other thing which Georgian revival churches had was a gallery up here. And most often there's a gallery. And Howell and Stokes, who are the architects on this particular project, I was very thrilled because Gary found a couple of days ago the original story they wrote when this church was opened for the Architectural Review. And they explained all of this in the article, why they did it, what it meant. And it was an interesting time because the architects were okay about having electricity, but they weren't wild about it. I think from the writing, they would have preferred gas. But they talked about how advanced this particular church was, the model of the new Georgian revival church in New England. This was it. There was a similar one that's very, very close, not done by them, but someone else, on the green in New Haven. So if you're there and you see a church that looks similar, that's what it is. But they got talking about how they brought newfangled ideas in. They had to put up with electricity, but they figured they'd use it. So up there in the galleries, they figured in those, and you'll see on the front of your bulletin that there are boxes that people sat in. For the different boxes, they figured there might be a problem with hearing. So they put in, which we were looking up yesterday, an acousticon. This is the first hearing aid device for a church. So it was a little phone. If you sat up there in one of the galleries, you could listen and hear well. We have a version of that today, but it's a portable version. So as you see, these are all elements of what it meant to this church was built to speak about immortality. It was built to speak about faith. It was built to speak about incorporating all the best of the past and some of the new. And it was really for our congregation. It was their vision. And you can tell by the size of this what they thought the future was going to hold for churches. And of course, we're not seeing that these days. We're looking at the contraction of people attending. But what churches are and how they function in the community as well are changing. And this is the thing that we're currently working on with the City Hall to have the preservation partnership, which will allow us to continue to worship here in perpetuity, and at the same time, in this wonderfully acoustically perfect hall, they get to use it for concerts, for gatherings, etc. So it was a gift to us from the architects, and it's going to be a gift to the community as well. So, anybody have any? This is one of those Sundays where you can ask questions or have comments. Anything you wanted to ask or? Yes. Thanks. The only thing I forgot on my list, the dome is another feature of Georgian architecture. And what you have here, I don't know if you can see this. There's my light. The outside of the dome is bordered with reeds that are bound together. And the same thing is true even tighter for the lights itself. This was and it has a lot of rondelles, a lot of flowers on it. The problem with this was an element in almost all of the Georgian churches. It doesn't help acoustics. In fact, it kind of messes up the acoustics. But somehow, Howell and Stokes managed to put this up in such a way that we have the perfect acoustics we have. And I'm not even quite sure how we know how they did that, but we are certainly gifted with that. Any other questions on that, Linda? Yeah, no, it's something you'd find in a Roman temple, and that's how it ends up in Georgian architecture as well. Anyone else? Well, the fourth meeting house burned in 1907, And so, as I said, it took about 2 weeks to raise the first $25,000. I think the whole thing cost either $75,000 or $100,000 for this church. Imagine the difference in what a dollar would do. It took 2 years to reconstruct. The manse, which is over there, had been right on this property. So they literally dug a hole over there, put tree trunks in it, and plumped the manse on top of it. The manse is not in the greatest shape. And if you go down in the basement, you get to see that the manse is sitting still on tree trunks from 1907. So, anyone else? Oh, was he? Oh, wow. Didn't know that. It was right on the corner, right where we're kind of the back 2/3 here. She said one of our own members, Nat Rogers, was born in that manse when it was here by the. It was on the corner when he was born in there. Yeah, so it has significance to us. Yeah. The two what? You talking about that? I think that is like I looked at one of them the other day. It looks to me like an artichoke, but I think it really is supposed to be more like one of the pineapples like you have here. It's kind of a pineapple shape. So again, that's welcome. And so it makes sense when you go outside, more urns out there. Good Lord, there are more urns on the outside of this church. But if you look at the urns out there, they have the pineapple, which is welcome. Welcome to this church. What about the tower? Well, the tower is what we call a bullfinch-style tower. And it was meant not to be the spires that we had in New England. It got kind of tacky for a while among New England Protestant churches to see who could have the biggest spire. It then became questioned, why are you doing this? Isn't this pride? Aren't you missing the point? This is supposed to be God's house. But when Stokes and Howell built that tower outside, which was also not unusual for a Georgian church, they wanted it to look, in case you've ever thought this, like a lighthouse. Something that people could follow to find the church and to find Jesus and to find God. So it had I've always thought that, I've used that metaphor before in writing about the church. It's meant to be that way. And I had an interesting conversation not too long ago online with a guy who contacted me. He says, my dad and I are the ones who painted the gold on the dome up there, and he was all excited and had such a feeling of kindredness with this church. And a lot of people do. A lot of people in our town have celebrated many, many important things here. So just as our forefathers did not allow the church to die, that's what we're doing now, looking for new ways to keep it going, not only for us, but to get more people in and get more people connected to the message, which is we're disciples, we care, and we give you a beautiful place where you can feel the presence of God. Amen. I'm setting you off on your own walk today from this beautiful place and everything the insides contains as far as hidden messages about faith and immortality and conquering over death. I send you forth to find your own walk and find the people on that walk who need you to help support them on their way. May God bless and keep you all this week. May God make God's face to shine upon you in sunshine and in darkness, and to face whatever lies ahead for you with courage and honor and peace. Amen.